Thank you. It's lovely to be here, and I'm very grateful to Ross Olson and his dear wife for looking after me so well. And I've enjoyed great hospitality, and am enjoying great hospitality from them. So we're going to think about the wonder of the human voice. I've worked in acoustics, and I've worked in aerodynamics. I've worked in wind tunnels. You don't use them so much these days, but I know about aerodynamics. I know about sprays, which is not what I'm going to talk about tonight, but I've worked on the Bombardier Beetle, and I've got a prize doing some of the work with a company which supported me. And because I've done that, I make no apology for the fact that I do know something about the voice, because the voice, even though it's not using all the things that I've been have done my research in, which would be thermodynamics, nevertheless is all to do with acoustics. So when Richard Dawkins said of me and Stuart Burgess, my co-author in this big book, he said this. He said, maybe Burgess and McIntosh are right, and all the rest of us, biologists, geologists, archaeologists, historians, chemists, physicists, cosmologists, and yes, thermodynamicists, that's me, and respectable theologians, I like the word respectable theologians, the vast majority of Nobel Prize winners, fellows of the Royal Society, and of the national academies of the world are wrong. Not just slightly wrong, but catastrophically, appallingly, devastatingly wrong. Then he said, it is possible. Then he says, if Burgess and McIntosh are right, the scientific establishment has fallen. Well, at least he got the point. Yeah. And maybe he's made a point which others need to realize, that you cannot marry evolution and the Bible. You cannot do that biblically, which is not my main point tonight, but I can speak on that subject, and it is one of the titles I address. But you cannot do it also if you really believe in science. And I would suggest to you that from the science of the voice, there is no doubt to me that it's all pointing to the wonder of what God has done. And when people like Dawkins and others, if they stay in their position, leave this world, which sadly, obviously is going to happen, God won't necessarily say, well, why didn't you believe my book, the Bible? He might well say to Richard Dawkins and others, experts in their fields, why didn't you consider the implications of the very science that you were doing? I'm going to speak on the fact that the voice is made for communication, that the voice is unique, and I'm going to speak about the wonder of singing. I will add something else at the end. In the Bible, of course, it says that God said, let there be light. God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters. God said, and so on, all the way through Genesis 1. God speaks. He does say, let us make man in our image. But in every other case, it was an immediate, it was so. But with man, of course, he breathed into him and he became a living soul. There was a bit more detail given you there. But there is a sense already of an immediacy and a response to what? God's voice. It's very interesting that God's voice is referred to all the way through the Bible. In Psalm 29, the voice of the Lord is upon the waters, where Psalm 29 at that point is certainly referring to creation. God's voice brought the law of God to us, the Ten Commandments. And Deuteronomy refers to the fact that God's voice is being used. All the way through the Bible, you either get God speaking and people hearing, or else you get the phrase, the voice of the Lord, or the word of the Lord. Psalm 33 says, by the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and all the host of them by the breath of his mouth. And in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, And the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. And then it says, all things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made, John 1. And we can see that it is the voice of the Lord which is speaking when you compare that with Colossians 1 and with, of course, Genesis 1. There is the sustaining of creation. In Psalm 29, again, it speaks of the voice of the Lord, which I've mentioned, but it goes on to speak of the voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord divides the flames of fire. The voice of the Lord shakes the wilderness. There is a sense of sustaining of creation. The human voice then is made for communication in a similar way to the way God communicates. That's why I've put those verses up there. I'm unashamed in saying that when we put God in our thinking right at the very beginning and understand that God, according to the Bible, communicates, then it's hardly surprising that we are made in his image as communicating beings. The Trinity communicates, and of course this undermines the idea that God is only one, which Islam teaches. The Trinity, God the Father communicates with God the Son, and God the Son communicates with God the Father. And of course, the Holy Spirit, which never draws attention to himself, but nevertheless, he is also communicating with God the Father and God the Son. And it says in Matthew 3, at the baptism of Jesus, God the Father speaks to God the Son, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." And you do find other instances where Christ is directly, publicly addressing his Father. "Father, glorify your name." And there is a communication back. "I've already glorified it and will glorify it again." John 17, in the high priestly prayer of Jesus, "Glorify thou me with your own self, with the glory which I had with thee before the world was." And we're encouraged to speak to God as well as Christians. "I cried unto the Lord with my voice, and he heard me out of his holy hill." So we're made in God's image. And I want to now show you that the science shows to us that we're made for communication. And we're made to communicate not just basic needs like, "Where's my food?" Or, "Where's my shirt?" As the sort of typical sort of grunting relationship, which you might think goes on in some families. I hope it doesn't, but there we go. But we're encouraged to communicate in the way that this phrase would suggest. Communicating beauty and aesthetics. What a beautiful sunset. Or poetry or art expressing the beauty of what we're looking at or thinking about. Or maybe asking questions like, why am I here at all? Now that is not something you see animals doing. Yes, they communicate, and we're not denying that. So we're not saying that we're the only creatures which communicate. That would be wrong. But it's what we're communicating which is different. We're communicating much deeper issues to do with aesthetics, to do with sometimes just simply very complicated matters to do with engineering or mathematics even, such that we write research papers, such that when I'm dead and gone, somebody else might pick up what I've written. Communicating across generations through the written word, which possibly was originally spoken, is frankly amazing, and it's only true of human beings. So humans are the only creatures who think abstractly. The thought often then leads to words, or sometimes writing, of course, and often does, expressed with the voice or the pen. This is not to deny, as I've already said, that animals can be communicated with. You could train a dog by reward and punishment to say, stay, and he knows that that word stay means he's not to move. He associates that sound with a behavior. But if you were then to say, if you're sitting by the beach, well, not here in Minnesota, but if you go somewhere west or east, you might come, well, in our country, very quickly come to a beach or a coastline. And if we said to that dog, well, let's stay a bit longer on the beach. He hasn't, or she hasn't got a clue as to what you're meaning in a completely different context using the same word. So we do need to realize that we are built for communication, and communication not just of basic needs, which evolution would constantly try to argue with and say that this is why we've developed even aesthetics and beauty. Let's just look at how the voice works. I'm going to play to you a clip from a certain Professor Alice Roberts, who is the Professor of the Public Engagement in Science in the University of Birmingham. And she said this in no lesser place than the Royal Institution. If you know anything about our country, the Royal Institution was set up just a bit before the time of Michael Faraday, who, when he became the head of the Royal Institution following Sir Humphrey Davy, who invented the Davy lamp and was well known for his work in chemistry at the time. Humphrey Davy was once asked what was the best thing that he'd ever found. He said, Michael Faraday. Because Michael Faraday was just a bookbinder, son of a blacksmith, never went to university, but is probably the greatest ever experimental physicist who intuitively understood the connection with electricity and magnetism, who invented a whole host of things which I can't go into now, haven't time to, but I do a whole lecture on Michael Faraday. A godly Christian gentleman, and he loved children. And so he set up in the Royal Institution the Christmas lectures, which still go on today. And what did the BBC have the audacity to do? But to put this lady, Alice Roberts, who believes the total opposite, believes in evolution, as it says there, to lecture children on why she thinks that we are all apes.
We are all apes. All of you are apes. Every single one of you. If we look in the animal kingdom, our closest living relatives are chimpanzees, bonobos, and gorillas. So here's one of my cousins.
Well, let me explain that, Alice, there are two reasons why you've got it wrong. Number one, and then there are many more, it's not just two, but if she was to look at the foot of a real ape instead of the person acting as an ape who came in, she would have seen, and she knows this, does she surely, being an evolutionary biologist, she knows that they basically walk on another pair of hands, just as all the simian kind do, orangutans, monkeys, and other creatures in that family. They don't basically have the same type of foot, which is unique in human beings. And I could go on about that because we are built for bipedal motion. Monkeys and apes can walk on their extra hands, as it were, in the feet. They don't actually like it. They will actually tend to bend their knees, and the balance is not right for a straight up and down motion, or is it the standing straight up? So that's one thing. But also, Professor Roberts, you didn't talk about the voice, and you didn't talk about the larynx. You didn't talk about the way we are built for speech. You didn't examine or even give an impression to the children that there was an awful lot of detail which shows that our voices are made for communication of words, as well as, I will come in a moment, a bit later, to singing. Now, of course, there are some similarities. I'm not denying that. It's not to say that monkeys and chimps don't have an epiglottis, don't have a larynx. Of course they do. They have vocal cords, they have an esophagus, they have a tongue. But it's the differences which I particularly want to draw your attention to. Because we have a set of vocal cords, and so do they, which have to be covered by an epiglottis. As you're going to speak, you shouldn't try to speak with your mouth full if you're having a meal. We well know that. And that's true, of course, for monkeys. But let me just develop this a bit, that we have the capacity to make words. And you'll see in a moment why monkeys and chimps and apes cannot do what I'm doing now, because they don't have the apparatus in order to convey sounds and modify them, which is what I'm doing now. And I'm doing it in what is called speech. What is speech? Well, I need to develop my argument. First of all, I need to have you involved such that you see for yourselves, or you hear for yourselves, that we can make noises without the larynx. Did you know that? I can make a noise by whistling. Let's all whistle together, Amazing Grace. And we could carry on with that lovely hymn by John Newton. But John Newton, by the way, was a slave trader, wonderfully converted, because he came to know the Lord Jesus Christ as his own saviour while at sea in a storm, right? But there's more to John Newton's story, which would make yet another wonderful talk, but I'm not doing that now. So we were whistling then without using our larynx. That's the point. We were making a noise by our lips and the air passing through it, such that we could even change the frequency and the pitch. And a lot of us could do it. Probably not everybody could do it in tune, but would just about manage it. Now, there is other things going on, but think of what we just said at the moment as the combination of speech at the moment we know is to do with the larynx, which I'll say a bit more about in a moment, because you need something else on top of the larynx, which I'm going to talk about. But the larynx is doing quite a lot of the work, but not all. It's like a violin or a viola or all the stringed instruments in an orchestra, but you can, as I've just shown you, have wind instruments like a clarinet. Well, that's got a reed in it, so let's not say clarinet, let's say a flute, where you blow into a flute and you've got a sound coming out of just a tube. And then you could think of it with a trumpet or other wind instruments. So really, our vocal apparatus is similar to an orchestra where we're controlling the whole thing from our mouths. That's what's going on. And in order to control these, you need muscles. Stuart Burgess, my colleague, is a wonderful gentleman. I hugely respect him. We're very blessed to have him in our country. He does all sorts of mechanical engineering work. He's very brilliant at actually doing Olympic cycling, and he advises the British cycling team on how to reduce the drag and reduce the friction of the gears and everything in order to beat the biggest competitor we have, which is the United States. So, but anyway, apart from that, he also does drawing, as you can see here. He's drawn these pictures of the muscles in apes and the muscles in a human being. And we have approximately double, not quite double, the number of muscles. Not only the muscles on the outside, but the muscles on the inside, which operate the mouth and the tongue. Such that if a person has a stroke, this doesn't always happen, but it did happen to my father-in-law, you lose your gag reflex. So not only can you not swallow, but you can't talk, right? So perhaps some of you have sadly seen that happen with your elderly relatives, or sometimes it can happen in a younger person. But so it's all to do with muscle control. And just to really bring this point home, if you've got a child born with a cleft palate, it's a massive operation and you can never quite get them to speak perfectly, but it's all to do with the fact that their mouths, as you can see on the left-hand picture, they haven't got the lips connected, so they have to sew it all together. They can just about speak, and I'm not saying they don't speak reasonably well, but it's not perfect, which shows to you that we are fearfully and wonderfully made for speech, because we have the capacity with our muscles to control the mouth parts. It's wonderful what the surgeons do, and I'm full of admiration for them. But it just shows the perfection of what God did originally when he made Adam able to speak. Let's look a little bit more at the detail. A chimp can control its tongue, yes, but it's doing this motion, or going inside. So it's got a very thick tongue. It doesn't have the capacity to do what I'm going to do now. I'll describe it, then I'm going to do it, because I can't talk as well as demonstrate it, right? But it doesn't have the capacity to move the tongue up and down and have the vertical motion. So it's this. And it's that motion which is missing in a chimp. Yes, they can do it after a fashion. I'm not saying they can't open their mouths. Of course they can. They can stuff a banana in or whatever it is they're eating. But they don't have the fine control of a smaller tongue which can make clicks and do other motions which are to do with, for instance, the word "the," which the French don't like. The word "the," we don't like their French R. At least I find it very difficult to do the French R motion. But the word the, right, is actually quite a complicated motion. It's to do with the tongue not totally out, not totally in, and not totally held against the teeth, but allowing a bit of air to come through. And it's what the speech therapists call a phoning, such that it's just part of a syllable. It's just the beginning of a syllable, but it's very important, because if I don't put the, and it becomes ta. Actually, the Irish sometimes do this. If you speak to an Irishman, he'll say ta instead of th. Now, it's just I'm not trying to make a joke of the Irish, because they're all lovely people. But you can tell the accent, you can tell it's their way of speaking, such that if you're going to actually listen to them, you have to just listen a bit harder, because have they said what you think they've said? So communication is very important on these phonings. So the word "the" is an illustration. As I've said, the French are, to be fair to the French, I find extremely difficult to do, and yet the French do it all the time. If you talk about the Rhone, or they roll their R's, and I can't do it. And it's wonderful to hear it, but then the French person speaking English, you tell it immediately. Because there is this difference in the way people are naturally using their tongues for their language. If you go to South Africa, and if you hear the Zulus speaking their language, which I've heard in South Africa, they come out with clicks, which are so loud it would fill a whole room. They go, I can't do it properly, but they do that noise with their tongues, and they do it so loudly, and it's all part of their language. All this is to do with the motion of the tongue. I've also put here on this right-hand picture, you can see the nasal cavity is involved, such that if I put a peg out my nose, you either think I've got a cold, or else you think that you can't speak properly. So the nose is being used, the nasal cavity is being used, as well as the vocal cavity. So what I wish to point out, I said to you that there was something quite important in terms of the vocal apparatus of that which sits on top of the larynx. You do this without any thought, but you now, as an adult, throw your voice. And the reason you can throw your voice, even the quietest spoken of us, can raise the volume of our voice. Now, obviously, my wife tells me I'm too loud, and I just do it naturally, but others of you will not quite so loud as I am. But I speak in the open air, so I've trained my voice to be able to do this, but I had singing lessons as a child. I was in a choir before I became a Christian. Perhaps God knew I was going to be speaking in the open air later, but anyway. So trained speakers can throw their voice because they learn to actually use their diaphragm, and they're using their whole abdomen really to throw their voice. But the bit which is utterly vital is this bit sitting on top of the larynx, such that it comes up to about there. It's only about 2 inches at the most long, maybe 2.5 inches long. But a baby doesn't have it. You actually grow, your pharynx basically grows after you've been born, and you see a baby's face is really set right into its body. But gradually the neck grows, and then they're able to shout. They can scream, of course. We all know that babies can scream. But it's the pharynx which is vital for actually increasing the volume of speech coming out of the vocal cavity. Now, it's not to say that a chimp doesn't have a very tiny pharynx, but it doesn't have the vocal apparatus, and it never will have a properly sized pharynx, which is like a tube sitting over that which is making a noise. It's basically a resonance tube. In my work on combustion, we have what's called a Rika tube, named after a Dutchman who found this point. So you'll just watch this clip, and you'll see me put a metal tube over a vibrating flame, and suddenly the whole tube makes a noise. That is called resonance. Well, that's what's happening with your larynx. The larynx is vibrating. It's a vibrating muscle, right, which is being stretched. And when we come to singing, you'll see that depending on how much it's stretched determines the note. And that then vibrates against the pharynx, which then resonates with it. It vibrates in sympathy. Like this. And we put it over this. It makes a noise. So that's an example of resonance, and that's what the pharynx is doing when we speak and use our larynx. So that was the whole point of telling you that bit. So now, just so that you begin to get an understanding a bit more as to the science, this is a diagram going all the way down the vocal tract. So we start with the lips, then we come to the teeth, then we come to the mouth and the tongue, the throat, 2 positions there, then we come to the pharynx at the end. And on the right, you can see what the dentist might see as he's examining you, looking down your throat, or what a little camera might see, the shape. Now, those changes in shape are very important, because as you get these vibrations, the vibrations aren't just longitudinally going up and down the pharynx and the vocal tract. The vibrations are going sideways as well. So we get what we call harmonics. And the harmonics are what makes your voice to be very distinguishable from other voices, which I'll be coming to in our second point. All our voices are unique. If you're an engineer here, those who are artists, you can just go to sleep for a few moments. But the engineers here, you will understand that you can get sine waves to represent one frequency, and then you can get another frequency, because you're only just vibrating very slightly the atmospheric pressure. You can actually just add these all together. So you can get frequencies like I've got here, 100 cycles per second, HZ, that's what that means, 200, 300, and if you add them all together, depending on the amplitudes of each one, then you'll get that wavy thing at the bottom, which doesn't look anything like a sine wave. And that, of course, is forget the musicians and the artists are asleep, but I'll just whisper to the engineers, this is Fourier analysis, okay? If engineers understand Fourier analysis, which is where you actually add lots of waves together, and you can actually write it down mathematically what's going on, which means you've got a whole range of possibilities just from one person's vocal apparatus. Now, if none of you understood that, and particularly if the musicians and the artists didn't understand it, I'll speak in terms of music and then speak in terms of piano notes in a moment, but just let me mention that a speech therapist doesn't illustrate their work in terms of sine waves, because that doesn't really help them to understand what's going on. They actually look at loudness against frequency, or against, if you're an artist, pitch, right? So think of it like the notes on a piano. And so when they're trying to help a child speak, they'll say, please say ah, right? And they record it, and they actually see that the loudness comes at a particular frequency. You can see here 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 cycles per second. So think of that like notes on a piano. And so ah, e, and do is done by different movements of the mouth, such that we all know that R is like that, but E is by putting everything together, but still letting sound come through, and U is, again, very different. So you get different sounds depending on what frequencies are being used. So the musicians, the engineers can go to sleep now, but the musicians amongst you, you know what a keyboard looks like, and you go from C right up to B, and then you start again, and you can go through octaves of this. So we'll put quite a few octaves down. In fact, we'll put quite a number of octaves, right? So we've got there, what's it for? I think it's now 8 octaves. And if we put that very long keyboard against this, the bottom of this diagram, right? You can see at the bottom there's that keyboard. It's not very obvious, but I've tried to indicate where it is. Now I've got my wife saying the quick sly fox jumped over the lazy brown dog, which is using all the letters of the English alphabet. And you'll see that the loudness curve, which is the purple line, will jump around for every single syllable, not just syllable, but every little bit of sound, called a phoning in speech therapist terms. And so you've got a tremendous capacity for change, depending on the way the person speaks.
The quick, sly fox jumped over the lazy brown dog.
Now, this is me in the next bit. You'll have to put up with my boring voice as I go through the consonants.
B, k, d, f, g, p, s, t.
Okay, so you can see that every consonant had a different frequency range in what was coming over on that plot of the sound, the loudness, against the frequency or the pitch. So this means that you've got a huge capacity to say a word or to make a sound, because your voice is, your apparatus, your vocal sounds coming out from your mouth are being made by all sorts of movements which are over in a moment and yet very important for the speech that you're saying. And it's all to do with frequencies, it's all to do with notes on a piano. Just to prove this point, I'm going to have a piano talk. Hear this. So that was some European Union document full of bureaucracy that was being spoken. Don't worry about what they were saying. What is just amazing is that somebody programmed quick motions of a piano, different notes on a piano, to simulate speech, right? But they were doing it so fast that you couldn't get a pianist to play that, because it'd be, you're going so quickly on that bit, and then something over here, nothing to do with music, of course. It's just making the sounds which simulate what you are doing, and you don't have any thoughts as to what you're doing, but you're doing it, all right? Here's another one.
But how can I study the piano? I don't even know how to begin.
That one's not quite so clear. Yeah. Anyway, you get the idea. Now, I find that amazing because it gets over the point without me talking about the mathematics of Fourier series and all the other things which I've mentioned, such that hopefully you all get the sense of what's going on when you speak. It's a combination of lots and lots of frequencies being used instantaneously for a moment, and then yet another set being used depending on, of course, on what you're speaking. So this is frankly amazing that we have this capacity. Noam Chomsky from MIT said this once: too little is, and he's no friend to the Christian position as far as I know, too little is known about the beginnings of language to justify any far-reaching claims, which is basically another way of saying I haven't a clue where it came from. And of course we know from the Bible where speech came from. It came originally to Adam. Who knows what he was speaking originally? Some people think it may have been Hebrew, which it may have been. Can't prove that. But then, of course, at Babel, God changed all the languages and spread out such that we have all the differences today, including English and, due to a certain event in 1776, American as well. So I had to get that in, didn't I? If you want to know more on this type of issue, there is a book which was written some years ago by Penner called Evolution Challenged by Language and Speech. He quotes a huge number of people in that book. And there is absolutely no doubt that evolutionists don't even know where to begin to actually suggest the origin of what they would suggest grunting becoming speech. There is no way that you can actually see even a route through to actually show where this comes from. The book, sadly, as far as I know, is no longer in print, but you can get second-hand copies of it if you want to know more. Sadly, the prices are going up and up and up because of that, because other people want to get hold of it. Now, just to show how this really is just wonderful and connected with the way the vocal tract is made in humans. This is an MRI, a magnetoresonance imaging video. So somebody's lying in Raymond Damadian's wonderful invention. He was a creation believer, by the way. He's died now, but he was the one who invented the MRI. And it's a very sophisticated piece of equipment, and someone is lying in it and speaking. It's not often you get videos done of it. And he or she is speaking, and I think it's a she, and you will see the motion of the tongue, the motion of, please notice, the motion at the back of the tongue where there is the restriction coming down. If you say king, right? That motion is very important to speech. Please also see what's happening with the nasal cavity and especially the tongue. Remember, the fine movement of the tongue is essential. So let me play this to you.
Speech production is possibly the most complex of human behaviours. In 1 second of fluent speech, we can produce approximately 5 or 6 syllables comprising 10 to 12 phonemes and a variety of articulatory gestures. This requires coordinating dozens of muscles from the diaphragm and ribcage used to provide the source of sound as air passes through the larynx, to the tongue, lips, and jaw, used with precision to shape the chambers of the vocal tract.
That's just amazing. That video says it all. I was put onto that by a speech therapist I know. So there is frankly no way around this, that we are built for speech, we're built for communication. Yes, monkeys and apes can squeak to each other, and we know that the squeaks change to danger squeaks if there's a tiger or something coming in the area. We know all that, but that's not the same as speech, which is so rich. So let me now come to 2 further points which are going to be brief. That's been the main point. Did you know, and I hinted at this already, that every voice is unique? Such that even twins, obviously there'll be some similarities, but the parents know which one is speaking on the phone. They'll be able to distinguish it. And even so-called identical twins, there will be a difference. So everyone has a unique voice. Everyone combines the harmonics in a different way. Children are all different, but as adults, we're all different. For the engineers amongst you, it's to do with combining the harmonics in different ways, where somebody will do it uniquely and the other person won't do it in exactly the same way, all because these different frequencies are being produced by shapes. If I show you this next little clip, you'll see that the frequencies are changing the shape of a particular diaphragm and its vibration. Actually, it's the other way with speech. We are changing the motion of the muscles 3-dimensionally in our throat, and that's producing the sound. This is the other way. This is sound changing the shape, but it makes the point well.
Cymatics expert John Stuart Reid, and he's kindly recreated for us the Chladni experiment. What we can see here is a metal sheet, this time connected to a sound driver and being fed by a frequency generator. And as the frequencies increase, so do the complexities of the patterns that appear on the plate, as you can see for your own eyes.
So a different pattern of shape movement produces different frequencies. It's the other way around for speech. And so there is all sorts of ways of demonstrating this, but I thought that was quite a good one. So the banks, before AI came onto the scene, would say to you, prove that it's you using this phone, that you haven't stolen it, and speak into it. Now, of course, AI has got so good that they can simulate your voice, so they're no longer doing it by speaking into the phone. So that is a real danger with artificial intelligence becoming so good. But just to make this point, this is from an English angle, but you folk here over in the US, I think you have a respect for our little land. So I think you'll know who this voice is. Tell me who it is.
I read your
Who's that?
The other day, and I thought it was incredibly moving and very brave of you to write down, such personal feelings.
Very well known, royalty.
How you found.
Well done. Somebody's got it. It's Prince William, right? So he's the heir to the throne, as you know. And who is this? Again, you'll know this person, but the clue is historical.
By the way, I cannot help to reflect that if my father had been American and my mother British, it's just the other way around.
Yes.
I might have got here on my own.
It's Churchill addressing the American Senate, I think just after you came into the Second World War. I can't remember now which way around it was or whether it was just before. And of course his mother was American, and his father was English. And he says that it could, if it had been the other way around, yeah, you'd have got here on my own. Who's this?
Creatures are connected one with the other.
Not so well known.
Directly or indirectly, and all are ultimately
Julie?
on vegetation.
David Attenborough, well done. David Attenborough. That's a very much younger picture of him. He's in his dotage now, I'm afraid, in his 90s. But it's certainly a very distinguishable, yes, it's English, you can tell it's British, but everyone is different. And by the way, Churchill spoke with a lisp. And it's very, very difficult even for AI to copy a lisp. You can't copy it. It's very difficult to mimic it. But he had a problem, which meant that he had to practice and practice his speeches. And that's how he spoke so brilliantly during very critical war years. Now, this one is singing. You probably won't know who it is, but you can hear the lilt in his voice if you listen carefully. And it might give you a clue because it's not England, but it's from our British Isles. You probably don't know the name. Yeah, it's Aled Jones from Wales, and you could hear the Welsh lilt in his voice. But just to include you all, I thought I'd play you this to make the point that every voice is unique.
You live in a thin freedom.
Who's this?
It's part of the vein.
JFK.
Let me ask you as I close to lift your eyes beyond the dangers of today,
And
wherever they may live. A citizen is really there. And therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the word, each man I feel you.
that's a famous speech in 1963, and within a few months, sadly, he'd been murdered in Dallas. So we can distinguish by voice famous people, and of course it happens even over the phone. You know who's speaking, and of course if the phone company wants to save money, they restrict the window of what frequencies they have, and then it gets more difficult because you need these extra harmonics in order to understand. Which leads me now to my final point, and I've got a very quick, a very final point, but I hope you find this fascinating because I do. It just blows my mind what's going on. Now we come to singing, and this is the climax of everything, because we are made not only by the ability to speak, but the ability to sing. Now, not all of us can sing well, but nevertheless, when we have our new bodies in heaven, we'll all be able to sing, okay? And we'll be able to sing in tune. Now, first of all, let me give you an example of singing where it's just secular singing, but it still shows the amazing ability of the human voice. This is Renee Fleming singing. She's a German, I think, yes, German singer, and she's singing Puccini's O mio babbino caro, which is, you know, Father, will you let me marry the person I want to marry, not the one that she's singing to her father. And this is a very famous song. And so we could go on. It's a beautiful song, of course. And I'm sure the dad gave in immediately. You know, he couldn't say no to that, could he? Because it came with emotion. And it's the ability to use emotion, to use words and the larynx on top of the larynx. Now this is where it's different to birds, even though bird song is beautiful. And if I have time, well, I won't have time, I won't play you bird song, but Birds, of course, do sing beautifully, but they're not singing words. Yes, they can copy and mimic human beings. They don't understand what they're doing, but they can mimic human beings, but they cannot combine it with another note as well, which is carrying everything in a tune, right? So yes, they could do a tune, but they can't do the tune with words, which is unique to human beings. Whales sing, but they cannot combine words with music, which is peculiar to human beings. So this is just utterly wonderful that we have the ability to do this. And of course, we have choirs which sit in the middle of a whole set of instruments as well. When you get choirs singing with instruments, it's very, very powerful. And of course, badly used, songs can be used to actually encourage not good emotions, but evil emotions. So it's very, very powerful. And of course, that is peculiar to human beings. It's a combination of harmonics again, coming from the larynx being the main note bearer, but then harmonics are built on top, using, as I mentioned earlier, the pharynx and the shape of the mouth and all the things that I've been saying to you. Just listen to this, which is another song. Again, it's not overtly Christian, but it's religious, and it's Fauré's Requiem, and it's very beautiful. And you can see here the ability of a trained voice to sing almost a pure note, and it's absolutely beautiful. That's the orchestra. Now look on the left, you see a peak, and another one not far away from it, which may be one harmonic. I don't think it's two people. So, okay, that's in Latin, it's not in English, but so we can't understand it immediately. Now let me come to something which really, to my mind, is the peak of all, which is Christian singing, and singing beautiful songs to the glory, not of man, but to the glory of God. And during COVID, I don't know whether some of you found this, but I certainly found it very taxing, that you couldn't communicate with other people. Those born in COVID actually suffered mentally, I think, during those years. Anyway, how were you going to form a choir in COVID? Well, people had all sorts of ideas, and some would do one part and then send it by email to another person, and the techies would get it together, you get a choir. But some people did everything themselves, and this is what this guy did. He put both the alto, the soprano, the alto, the tenor and the bass all together himself. And he was doing it all, which shows the huge variety of possibilities from one person's voice. This demonstrates it wonderfully, all to the glory of God.
Wonderful grace of Jesus, greater than all my sin. How shall my tongue describe it? Where shall its praise begin? Taking away my burden, setting my spirit free. For the wonderful grace of Jesus reaches me. Wonderful the matchless grace of Jesus, deeper than the mighty rolling sea, higher than the depths, sparkling like a fountain, all sufficient grace for even me.
I'm not going to be able to play it more, but now you get the beauty of what I'm talking about. You see, when we put our voices together for the glory of God, it gives great satisfaction to the one who made us. We are made to give glory to him, which then brings me to my last extra point, which is this. The whole world is waiting for one voice. And it's one voice which got everything going in the beginning. And it's one voice who will close it. That one voice was heard and witnessed to by those who saw him calm the Lake of Galilee in a moment in Mark chapter 4. He rose and with his voice, of course, rebuked the wind and said unto the sea, peace, be still. And the wind ceased and there was a great calm. What that must have been for the disciples witnessing it. They said, who is this that commands even the wind and the waves to obey him? And he did it with his voice. Not only that, many other examples all the way through the New Testament. You have Jesus using his voice even to say to a dead man, been dead 4 days, Lazarus, come forth out of the grave. And the man still wrapped in his grave clothes came out. It's absolutely staggering. The power of the voice of Jesus. And by the way, it didn't take millions of years to calm the Lake of Galilee, even seconds of millions it didn't take. Neither did it take millions of seconds for Lazarus to, as a dead man, to obey the voice of Jesus. And we need to realize that it will be that same voice which will be heard from heaven when Christ returns again. In Gethsemane, Jesus sang. Now that's a thought, isn't it? With his disciples, he sang a hymn, probably one of the Psalms of Ascendancy in the 120s, is it? As it moves up, there's a whole Songs of Ascent. We don't know which psalm it was, but the point is he sang. And then, of course, in Matthew, he cried in the Gethsemane, and it's true in Luke and Mark as well. It mentions how he said, "O Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me, yet nevertheless, not as I will, but thy will be done." And just to show you that there was actually 3 occasions recorded where God speaks from heaven, not only at the baptism of Jesus, but there's 2 other places, in Matthew 17 on the Mount of Transfiguration, and then in John 12 a voice came from heaven saying, I've both glorified it and will glorify it again. But just to complete this point, on the cross, in Gethsemane, you've seen that he cries, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. But on the cross, Jesus cries, my God, why have you forsaken me? And he doesn't get an answer. But of course, there was an answer, but not audibly from God the Father. Because what God the Father did was a symbolic tearing of the temple curtain from the top to the bottom at the cry of Jesus, as he had said, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. And then he cried after that, it is finished. And symbolically, God the Father tore supernaturally the curtain in the temple, showing that there is direct access between us and God. May I just encourage you, if you've not thought about these things, to read your Bible carefully and to see that there is wonderful demonstration of the power not only of God's making our voices, but the voice of Jesus in particular. And as I've been indicating, this is my last slide, the hour is coming when all the graves are going to open. You see, when Jesus said, Lazarus, come forth, some people have said, well, if he hadn't said Lazarus, all the graves would have opened. But they will all open at the end. Marvel or not at this, for the hour is coming in which all that are in the grave shall hear his voice. And then it very, very soberly says, some to the resurrection of life, and some to the resurrection of damnation. Let me ask you, On which side of the cross are you? Have you heard his voice? Amen. Spiritually? Have you turned to the Lord Jesus as your own Saviour? In the trial before Pilate, Jesus said, everyone that is of the truth hears my voice. And then Pilate said, what is truth? He wasn't scorning it. He knew full well that there in front of him was the very truth himself. But he wasn't prepared to stand for Christ. And he basically agreed to sell him, as it were, even though he knew it was going against all the principles of justice. On which side of the cross are you? I've spoken about the voice, I've spoken about the science, and I love to speak about creation, but my greatest desire is that every one of you comes to know the Lord Jesus Christ as your own Saviour. Thank you for listening to me. May God bless you all, and don't forget the books and the literature. Thank you.
Q&A.
Oh yeah, there's Q&A. Sorry, I'd forgotten that there is officially Q&A. I'm just going to do a few book adverts. There's some literature here from the TCCSA. And by the way, if you think I've got an accent, I'm not the one with the accent. You're the guys with the accent. Okay, I'm the original. Okay, so I hope you can hear me and understand me, because I don't come from the 51st state or the 52nd state. Making no funnies on that. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. But I do come from a little country just a bit east of here. So, and Dustin has been very kind to introduce me, and he's mentioned some of the work that I'm doing on thermodynamics and information. If you want to come to the Westby camp, which is following this weekend, I am going to do a voluntary session. That is, that some folk won't necessarily all come to it, but I am going to do a session on that there. So if folk are interested in that, you'll better go and contact Dennis Seiler and go along to the Westby conference in Wisconsin, which I'm going to after this. So it's a privilege to be with you, and thank you to Julie and others who are running the bookstall over here, which I'm going to mention now. And thank you to McKelvin, wherever he is. He was here a moment ago. He was the gentleman who was helping with the technical side. So on the books, I'll deal with the small books first. There is, or should have been, here it is, small booklet, which is called Is It True? Evidence for Creation. And this is a summary of a much bigger book, which is this one, which is also available. This, as you'd expect, is fairly expensive. It's a coffee table book for families. It's $25, and it almost broke the back of dear Ross as he was collecting them from whoever it was, DHL, to be delivered. But I've got a lot of these books, and I don't want to be taking them back with me to England or paying for them to be transported back to England. So please consider having a look at the open copy over there on the left. And we got plenty of books here which you could buy and consider as birthday presents or Christmas presents. This smaller version can be used just to give out to people. It's got all sorts of double page spreads, including a double page spread on the bombardier beetle, which I sometimes speak on because that's something I've researched into. But it's on all sorts of animals and other creatures. I'll be speaking tomorrow on migration. There's a double spread on migration. If you're coming to Radcliffe Road tomorrow, I will be speaking on that tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock. So that will be not just about bird migration, it'll be about loggerhead turtle migration. It frankly is stunning what is going on both in the air and in the water, and of course on the land as well with migration. Then we have a very beautiful kingfisher in Europe, which is got very bright iridescent blue and green colours. And my friend Colin Mitchell and I combined to write this. I did the aerodynamics, as you probably would expect. It inspired the bullet train, and on Faith Radio at lunchtime I spoke about the Kingfisher being the inspiration for the Japanese to get the Shinkansen fast trains to be much quieter when they came out of tunnels. Previous to that, there was a big bang that people were hearing. It was basically developing a shock as it went through. And by modelling it off after the wonderful shape of a kingfisher on a dive, they solved that problem, which indicates, of course, that kingfishers were designed and didn't come about by accident. There are two other books which don't have all the lovely colour pictures and everything else. The first book I ever wrote was Genesis for Today. I was very burdened that Christians believe in the Bible and its account of creation. So it goes through all the major issues. I'm obviously not going to talk on this tonight. I can't hit two targets at once. But this was really with a burden to actually have people understand the central issues that are at stake if we don't believe in Genesis. So I've got titles like Genesis and Fundamentals, Genesis and Science, Genesis and History, Genesis and Marriage, Genesis and Family Life, Genesis and the Lord's Day, Genesis and the Gospel, Genesis and Outreach, and so on and so forth. So that book is available, I think it's $8 on the bookstall there. And this one came about as a chapter which I wrote in Joel Beakey's commentary on the Bible, and I was allowed to produce it separately as a little commentary on Genesis 1 to 11. So that's going verse by verse through Genesis 1 to 11. Then there is also some pocket guides, which I brought with me, courtesy of United Airlines, who gave me 2 bags. So I brought these over. The others were sent ahead from a distributor in US. But these are produced by Answers in Genesis. And this is a very good book. It's a booklet really, but it's just summarizing the arguments for the science and the Bible refuting millions of years. And it's called Best Evidences. There are other pocket guides there as well. So please do look at these books afterwards. Please don't just go off, but please have a look at them. The big book, which I mentioned at the beginning, there it is opened out at some key pages. You can see the bombardier beetle is there, and also insects and dragonflies is there, and you can see that there is chapters on astronomy, chapters on the wonders of the human body, there's chapters on flight, which is hardly surprising, and there's also chapters on the rocks and the fossils, and that book is very much been used all over the world. It's been translated even into American, which I thought would amuse you. There is an American English version, so I love saying that to you guys. Then there is another booklet which I don't think I mentioned. No, I didn't mention it here, but Are You Really an Atheist? I use that evangelistically. I give it out to people who think that, atheism is the answer. And basically I reason that atheism makes no sense of science, doesn't make any sense of knowing anything. You can't be sure that you even know basic knowledge. So it's a very fundamental point. And I go through the arguments there. And then, of course, I end on the issue of morality and the gospel. And by the way, I also have some videos which you can get hold of at that website. If you want to find some of my videos, some of them are on that website, if you're interested. And I would recommend to you Genesis Apologetics, who have some very good short videos, which I think if you want some help, I would always go for their shorts, they're called, on Genesis Apologetics. Dan Biddle and others run that.
A couple of announcements first.
That's fine.
Yeah, so thank you, Dr. McIntosh. Thank you for those words, those well thought out words, and how we are indeed made in the image of God. We are made to communicate. And think about it. God used words to create most of the universe. He said, let there be stars, and there were stars. But then he custom made the first man and the first woman. You see a little glimpse of that. We've been reminded of the hardest thing that God has done, and that is to provide forgiveness for all of us. That perfect creation was spoiled by sin. God gave us free will. We were free to break the rule because He did not want to create robots.
Amen.
He wanted to create free beings who would choose to love and serve Him. And our first mother and first father broke that rule. But God did not abandon the whole human race. He made a way of forgiveness. When Jesus Christ had to come, He had to suffer, He had to die. But He did not take away the free will. He gave us the freedom to sin, but also the freedom to accept forgiveness. And there are people around us who have not accepted that. They've ignored it. Maybe they don't know about it. Maybe they think science has disproved the idea of God. Part of TCCSA's purpose is to break that myth and show that science points us to the Creator. But the way of forgiveness for sin, that has to be revealed to us. We've been given a conscience. We know when we've done wrong. We know we want forgiveness. And we all want to hear those words of, well done, faithful servant. You know, if you have accepted Christ, you're not done with this life. That's the start of finding the place that God has for you in His program. And that is to reach out. My grandmother used to sing the song, Rescue the Perishing. And I thought about the fact I don't hear that song much anymore, and I don't think people even believe it. The comfortable, well-to-do people that we see, we can't conceive that they're perishing. We lost sight. I think we need to pray that our hearts will be made tender, and we will realize we need to reach out. And for some, it's to reach out with the message of creation. For some, it's to reach out in love. We as TCCSA have existed for well over 50 years on the basis of volunteers and contributions. And we need financial contribution. We need to participate and want to participate in bringing Dr. McIntosh here. He came principally for the Living Waters Bible Camp, to which he's going to be going after this. And if you want to go and hear him again, you can find out about Living Waters Bible Camp. If you would like to help with TCCSA, we need all kinds of volunteers. You can be a creation pioneer in your church. Many good, solid churches say, well, creation is divisive. We don't want to get into that. We just want to present the gospel. Well, the gospel is dependent on creation. You come to these meetings, you can share that with the people in charge of missions at your church. We have a list on our website of speakers, which includes board members. and also other resources. And then if you would like to serve TCCSA, you can talk to one of us on the board. You can email the email listed on our website. The website is tccsa.tc. So you can look there. My email is on the website as well. But, this message is going to be on YouTube. If you go to tccsa.tc, you will find there the YouTube link where you can find links to not only this talk, but talks going back 10 plus years. And you can share these with other people. So we do have time for a few questions.
Yes, that's fine. Any questions that folk would like to ask? Yes, sir.
Do you think human laughter says anything about our ability to talk? I know hyenas can laugh, and a lot of mockingbirds, and so things out in nature can imitate sounds they hear. But when it comes to human laughter, I know how contagious it is.
Yeah.
And even if you don't know why they're laughing, you hear somebody laughing and you start laughing.
Start laughing
but you have
with
no
them.
idea why. But the relationship between words and language and then laughter, is laughter unique to America?
You're going to say to Americans?
I'm sorry, to humans. Sorry, I meant to humans. I know from you're a long ways from here. Your origins.
No,
anyways,
it's a very interesting point
about humor. Yeah.
Humor is a very, very subtle thing. Is humor? I mean, there are classic cases where, understatement which is done by the Brits is not understood by you Americans. You don't generally use understatement. There is humor in situations, situational humor, but it all shows what you're getting at, which is it's not the sound which you're so much getting at here. It's the very fact that it's part of the human condition that we can, of course, express deep emotion of sadness, very deep, and of course animals can do that as well. Elephants, when another elephant's died, they grieve for many years. But on the flip side, we can laugh, and that's different to great joy, which is not the same. Laughter is a very difficult thing to explain, and I think that's what you're getting at.
You can't make a joke that doesn't include words.
No, you can't.
You might do funny things.
Yes.
And just by being a mime or something like that.
Yeah.
But when it comes to jokes, you have to use words in order to.
Yeah, and the joke will be very limited, usually, to that particular language. Mm-hmm. Yeah. As I've just said, an understated joke, just done by implication, cannot translate into another language generally. And sometimes even into another country using the same language, as I've just said. The difference between our nation and yours is quite marked when it comes to that. And I'm being serious about the point that I'm making. The language then is connected with humor, and humor and being a comic on something is very much to do with the message which is being carried, which is therefore to do with intelligence. And it's very difficult to see how that could ever have come about by an evolutionary pathway. Mm-hmm. This is why J.G. Penner makes the point that language cannot be explained by evolution. There is no way to explain what's going on when we know by experience that language is far more than just the noises. It's to do with the concepts. Here's the book that I was referring to. It's to do with the concepts which those noises are carrying. And it's very difficult, therefore, to see any way by which evolution can explain this. And by the way, the older languages, like Sanskrit, are far more complicated than modern languages. So again, this indicates that God split the languages up into very complicated languages. Mandarin, which is an example of a tonal language, Chinese, is all to do with and and that means a different communication sound if you go up at the end and if you go down at the end. And so learning Mandarin can be very difficult for ourselves who are not used to tonal languages. So yeah, there's a lot in your point. Another point, yes, sir?
Well, this will be the last one.
Oh, there was another hand went up. Can I take two more? Because there was two hands went up together. Sorry, if that's all right. Thank you. Yes, sir.
In all of your studies and in collaboration with other people, which language do you believe is the language that God used when He spoke, "Let there be light"? Or another question is, what language was scrambled at the Tower of Babel?
I indicated that many people think that it was Hebrew. It could well have been Hebrew, but it's very difficult to totally prove that. But certainly the name Adam, given to Adam, of course, means earth in Hebrew. So that would strongly suggest, but you can't totally prove it, that it was a Semitic language and probably Hebrew. Yeah, there was another hand went up.
Yeah, I was just, you talked about our language, it has notes on the piano. Just my own personal observation, and I was wondering if you could make some more comments about this, but our cultural music reflects language, because Oli and Lena, they talk up and down and they play the polka, and if you're Asian, and you go wing, 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 that the music reflects the language as well.
Yes, I would agree with you. And sometimes we need to be careful about saying that our Western music scale is the only way to do music. We well know that in India they have a different scale, and so that is reflected, as you just said, in the way that their language will, although Hindi is not a tonal language, nevertheless the way you speak it will reflect their musical scale. And it's difficult to prove this point. It's just you need to hear Indians speaking, and they go up and down just like their music does. So your point is well made. Yeah, I think we'll have to leave it there.
Yeah, thank you,
Sorry, sir.
Dr. McIntosh. These sounds had great meaning. You have really enriched us.
Thank you, Ross.
Folks, I think Dr. McIntosh is willing to stay and answer questions individually.
Yes, certainly, personally.
He did eat something. He doesn't usually eat before he speaks, but we did make him eat something, and so he's probably good for another hour and a half.
Oh, not quite an hour and a half, but there we go.
And stop by this table. There's some books there, and there are also posters and flyers for the next month and calendars, and then go across to that table and look at Dr. McIntosh's books and flyers. Next month, it's Bruce Malone talking about the awe of God. Nowadays, people don't have awe of God. They don't think that God needs to be feared, even respected. Bruce Malone is going to give us a wonderful message next month, so come back.
God bless you all. Thank you.